The Babylon Project was our last best hope for sci-fi, a self-contained podcast 1 hour long located on the internet, a place of fun and discussion for Babylon 5 fans everywhere, a shining beacon in cyberspace, all alone in the night. It was the dawn of the 20th anniversary of Babylon 5, the year the Great War to free Bab 5 came upon us all. This is the story of the last of the Babylon podcast. The year is 2016. The name of the place is the Babylon Project Podcast.
This is Maggie Egan, your ISN news anchor, and you're listening to the Babylon Project podcast. Thanks for listening.
Hi there, Babylon 5 fans. Welcome to a probably way too long delayed feedback episode of the Babylon Project podcast. This is Raul Wybera, and as always, I am joined tonight by my good friend Jim Arrowwood. How are you tonight, sir?
Yeah, I'm good. Doing well.
Oh, gosh. You know, it's been way too long since we've done this.
Yeah.
And I will, all right, some people may be aware, but for those who aren't, the delays, both in feedback and the show, have been my fault. My mom had been very, very ill, actually starting around July-ish, August. It had been a continuing process with a lot of time in the hospital, and she passed at the beginning of January. So there it is, as Jim likes to say.
Yep, there it is.
But we are back. I've got some rest. I've had some recovery, and you will be hearing a whole lot more of us and hopefully a lot more feedback. I will tell you what, Jim, for some reason, a whole lot of our feedback throughout this second half or so of season 2 comes off of our Facebook feed rather than email or the web page. I guess this is Facebook world in some ways now. Want to go ahead and take care of the Facebook stuff after we take care of the regular emails?
Yeah, well, let's go ahead and do that.
All right. Well, for our first email, I'm not going to read this one, and you're not going to read this one. I just happen to have the email sender here with me. So I'm going to let him read this one, and we'll give him a little grilling. Go ahead.
Fair enough.
I love the podcast. It lets me listen to something during schoolwork that is very relaxing, yet very funny. Keep up the great work, Dad and Mr. Jim.
Well, thank you. And for those who might be wondering, why is he listening to podcasts during school?
I was wondering that.
He is homeschooled. Yeah, you're a teacher. So is my wife. But he's homeschooled, so that's his background noise while he's working. What are your thoughts, Stinker, about Babylon 5?
It's very interesting. It's interesting enough that I actually watched the whole all the seasons 2 times, and every time I just found something new and fun to keep watching it.
So who's your favorite character on the show?
Mr. Garibaldi.
I could have, that one was an easy one for me to guess, at least.
Yes.
Oh, gosh. Well, I'm going to let you go, Stinker, because I know you're wanting, I know you've got a variety of things that you still need to do.
Raul.
Yes,
Raul.
sir.
The kid's big enough to go bear hunting with a stick, and you call him Stinker?
That's actually a step up from the original, which I'm not going to say unless he gives me permission.
I don't care.
Yeah, it used to be Stinkerbell.
Oh, my gosh.
You still call me that.
Not often.
You did
only
it,
when
you
I
did it at
slip.
Walmart last week.
Oh, God. And he doesn't let me forget it either.
Oh, my goodness.
And you know what? At age 13, I mean, he sounds like he's 16 or 17, but he's actually only 13.
Yeah.
At age 13, his relationship with showers, stinker is the right name for him.
Ooh. That's cold, man.
He's
cold.
on Anthea's voiceover setup, so he can't reach me to smack me. Of course, there is this thing called payback.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'd sure have him in my choir with that bass voice he's got. I'll take it.
Oh, he has done choir before. Anthea's taught him a bit. He still gets the odd crack here and there. And he was in a homeschool co-op. He's done some homeschool co-op choir. They were happy. They were happy to have someone who can sing the low end naturally as well.
Yeah.
So, yep, you would definitely like him in your choir.
There we go.
And his basketball coach seems to like him. He's what, 5'9" now?
Yeah.
At age 13.
Well, I'll tell you what, I wouldn't mind listening to him sing, but you don't get to. You know this.
He agrees with you. The one exception is there was an old lady.
Yeah.
Oh.
You're the best one.
So
I won't sing it.
Good.
I don't want to damage the audio equipment.
So he inherits all his musical ability from his mom.
Yeah. He picked that up from Anthea. He picked up his geekiness from me.
There you go.
So, Antonio, go ahead and say goodbye, and I'll let you go and get back to what you were doing.
Goodbye.
So long now.
Toodles. I've got a great kid there.
Yeah, he's all right.
Okay. Next email, and actually this comes from the webpage, is from Chris Waits, and it's about Points of Departure, which was episode 201. Hey, Jim and Raul. I understood you both to believe Sheridan was probably Clark's pick to command Babylon 5. I tend to think he was Santiago's. If General Haig trusted Captain Sheridan to do a stealth investigation, then likely Sheridan was close with President Santiago. Haig and Santiago both knew Sheridan was one of the good guys and highly competent, so he was next on the list if something happened to Sinclair, even if the optics looked bad with him being the Star Killer. Clark may have known less about Sheridan, but knew the Star Killer label might antagonize the aliens and was happy to appoint him. In effect, Haig pulled one over on Clark. Not sure why I dwelled on that after listening, but I did. As usual, enjoyed hearing all of your thoughts. I learn new things on each podcast. Chris Waits. I learned something reading the email.
Well, yeah, he's got a point.
He's got a point.
Because now we were thinking, if I recall, that Sheridan was appointed to upset the alien races.
Right.
Particularly the Minbari.
Right.
But this kind of gives a different look at things.
Yeah. It's, well, obviously the Hay connection is there. But
well, yeah.
Santiago being in the loop originally.
Yeah. And then you can certainly imagine something like this happening when you consider of all the everything that's going on. Everybody's doing their little maneuvering here and there, trying to get the upper hand on things.
Yeah.
So while Clark got his big steak, I guess Haig got his bologna sandwich, which blew up right in Clark's face. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. So that's a good point, Chris. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Our next comment is regarding podcast 210 Gropos, and this is from Michael Mole. And it's a short comment. He notes, quote, playing the stereotype, unquote. Pretty sure that's a stereotype of General Patton.
Of course, he's referring to General Franklin.
Correct. And I remember we made comments about the guy, especially with his kid, playing a stereotype. So, yep, makes sense.
It's plausible, very plausible.
I'm a little too young to remember Patton directly, And sadly enough, I hate to say this, but I've never seen the movie.
Oh, well, you should. You really should. It is an interesting movie. It is. I can't speak to its historical accuracy. A lot of it does match up with Omar Bradley's book, A Soldier's Story, but George C. Scott does just a great job convincing you that he is Patton.
Yeah. Oh, I have never heard anything but wonderful about it.
Yeah, it's a great movie. And then after that, in case you didn't know, there is another movie called The Last Days of Patton,
Ah.
which kind of chronicles following the automobile accident that he had, and then wound up in the hospital in really, really bad shape.
Okay.
And in that movie, I don't know, I can't remember now if it was the movie or the book, Mrs. Patton kind of took over quite a bit.
Mm.
If you watch Patton, you'll notice that he had kind of some strained relationships with a certain general called Beadle Smith.
Okay.
That he was an aide to Eisenhower. And I guess when Patton was laying in the hospital, General Smith, came in to visit, and Mrs. Patton threw him out.
And this is historical or just movie plot or?
As far as I know, no, Beadle Smith and and George Patton were not friends.
No, that part I know, but I mean, the bit about Smith visiting him and his wife throwing him out, some of those incidents are those.
I wouldn't have any doubt of the truth in that. I know I either read it in the book or I saw it in the movie, because I read both, or
Okay.
I consumed both, I should say.
And the sad part is I am a bit of a history buff, so it's amazing the little odd gaping holes that one finds.
Yeah. No, definitely see Patton. I'm sure it's available somewhere.
I will do that. You want to go ahead and take the next one, sir?
Sure will. All right. So, I can't really tell who this is from.
Just
Joseph?
SPH. Oh,
SP.
I'm betting that is Joseph.
Could be. Can't read the name. There's some symbol in front of it. At any rate, a little correction about the episode's Hugo status. In the Shadow of Zahadum was not one of the 5 Hugo finalists in 1996, though it was one of the 6 B5 episodes to receive nominations that year. The second episode that would have been nominated was The Fall of Night, but JMS declined to prevent splitting votes. The Long Twilight Struggle was the next one on the list, and DS9 episode, which was the 7th, got the nomination instead. That episode was The Visitor. Trials and Tribulations was nominated in 1997 against Severed Dreams.
Right. Okay. Spank me.
Well,
This is why we depend on our listeners.
Yeah.
I am far from perfect.
And I don't know, are you familiar with the 2 episodes that are mentioned from Deep Space Nine here?
The Visitor. Oh, that's not the one. That's not the Wesley episode, is it?
No.
Okay.
Wesley wasn't in Deep Space Nine.
Oh, no. Yeah, you're right. The Visitor. Duh.
Yeah. The Visitor was.
I'm thinking. Remember I was thinking the Traveler from TNG.
Oh, yeah.
I don't remember the Visitor off the top of my head, but if you give a little of the plot, I will. Trials and Tribulations, I absolutely remember, and I thought it was a blast.
Yeah. Well, the Visitor was Jake and his dad were in engineering on the Defiant, and something had gone out of sync or something, and they had to put this tool in, and then there was a plasma discharge from the warp core, and it threw Benjamin Sisko out of phase.
Okay.
And so Jake was left alone, and every now and then Benjamin would come back into phase and move out of phase, in and out of phase. And Jake gave up his writing career and started studying science, and got, I guess, a few doctor degrees. And when he was very, very old,
I remember this now. Yes, keep going.
Yeah. Well, when he was very, very old, Benjamin comes back, and in order for everything to go back into phase, Jake had to die.
Mm-hmm.
So he poisoned himself, and he died, and then everything reset, of course, and the accident didn't happen.
Right.
Well, as Jake or Benjamin was able to stop the accident from rehappening.
Which completely reset the timeline.
Yeah. Now this is a terrible description of a great episode.
It was powerful.
Yeah. Tony Todd played Jake Sisko as he got older and just did an amazing job.
Mm-hmm.
It was just absolutely a real tear-jerking episode. Right. One of the best episodes of DS9.
Yeah, I remember this one. I remember this one now. Once you got into a little further into it, it's like, boop, the light bulb went off. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Now, one of the reasons that Joseph is talking about, I can't tell if it's Joseph or it's just the initials SPH.
It must be just SPH because
the commenter. One of the things.
Yeah.
Season 1, if I remember correctly, got into a little mess where Hugos were concerned. Basically, there were too many episodes that were up for nomination, and it kind of watered down the voting. So when he's talking about declining to prevent splitting the votes, that's what he's referring to. All right. Let's move on to what seems to be our big comment stream, which seems to be on Facebook. Let's see. Now, I know we've got some of our listeners that do listen on Facebook, which means you may have seen some of these since it's a public forum, but that's the same is true about the webpage, and most of our listeners, I think, are still over on iTunes. From the episode Soulmates, David Daniels tells us that he loves this episode, and John Reynolds comments about looking forward to it. Ton DeWitt's comment, more Geek Fest at the end, and I think he's talking about the banter that between you and I. We do have this tendency to geek out.
Oh yeah.
And the winner is Richard Shelvin, that comments, even super aliens have bad hair days. That was that was really a classic piece there. Of the Delenn moments, it's right up there with but and the little black dress.
but you sound like a boat.
Yeah, that episode of the light episodes, as I know, that's probably one of my absolute favorites. Anyway, continue.
All right, and so in reference to Gropos, the episode Gropos, John Reynolds writes on Facebook, in one of the interviews on the anniversary DVDs, Jerry Doyle told how he read Paul Winfield the Riot Act on the very first day of shooting because he was so unprepared he needed cue cards.
Ouch.
Yeah, and I responded to that, no kidding, because that was something I didn't know.
Yeah. That is a definite big ouch.
And then John continues after that. He says, it was a who the F do you think you are type of dressing down. LOL. Okay, Now, Paul Winfield, we're talking about a big star.
Yeah.
And I can definitely see Jerry Doyle letting him know that it's unacceptable to be that unprofessional.
From what I've seen of Jerry Doyle and have heard of Jerry Doyle, without hesitation.
Yeah. But, Paul Winfield is a movie star. Okay. And not a TV actor as much. And so from what I understand,
different
the two of them are
disciplines.
different worlds.
Yeah, they are completely different
know,
disciplines.
They'll be standing there looking at their script and looking at the lines, and then the director says, roll them, and they toss the script behind the couch or whatever and start doing their lines,
On which?
on the TV shows.
Yeah.
Yeah. And with movies, it's a little bit different. Bigger budget, more time, so forth and so on.
Right. Our next comment comes from episode 209, which is The Coming of Shadows. And thank you for those who've corrected me, Troy. I know you'll notice I just said The Coming of Shadows and not The Coming of the Shadows.
Yeah.
Which I have this bad habit of slipping in. Richard Shelvin, and correct me, Richard, if I'm not pronouncing the last name correctly, makes the note, a very poignant episode, and the actor who played Turan was amazing. Beautifully written.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
That is absolutely the case. Now, this was another major film actor, too, the guy who played Turan.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to remember where we knew him from. I can't quite. Of course, if we went back to our show notes, we would know, wouldn't we?
Well, you might have the show notes, but I've pretty well put everything aside, everything in the trash on my end.
Yeah. Hey, folks, suggestion: give the podcast a re-listen.
Yeah.
Moving on up.
All right. In response to our posting of All Alone in the Night, episode 2-11, David Daniels writes in, I still crave for more Babylon 5 material, but JMS still doesn't have enough clout with Warner Brothers to make it happen when it comes to TV rights.
Well, okay, in defense of both Joe Straczynski and Warner Brothers, remember what Joe said at the very beginning, starting this out. Babylon 5 is going to be 5 seasons, end of story, no more, no less. Well, assuming he doesn't get canceled, no less.
Yeah.
It is a single novel that has a defined beginning, middle, and end. Now, he actually did a lot more in the Babylon 5 universe than he originally expected to do, with the 4 additional movies, the Sci-Fi Channel Legends of the Ranger for TV movie as well. And then he did make the effort to continue it in Crusade. There wasn't a Warner Brother conflict with Crusade. It was more of creative control issues with Sci-Fi Channel. And that was, so it's not necessarily a rights issue between Straczynski and Warner. And for those who aren't aware, he's been talking about, and I think we've talked about this in one of our past podcasts, about the possibility of doing I've heard the phrase used as a reboot, but knowing Straczynski, it won't be a reboot in the common sense. So my leaning would be very much to give both Joe and Warner some space on that one. And I know getting any sort of television show off, especially these days, is a very complex proposition.
Oh boy. Yeah, that and keeping it on the air
is even harder.
Yes.
We do get a request from Maggie Egan to give her IMDb page a peek. Please do that if you haven't, just to help boost her ratings and boost her views as well.
Yep.
And in that, we got a question from Michael Saucier. Is she married to Jim Cummings, the fantastic voice actor? And Jim, I think you answered that one for us. Her husband is Jim.
Yeah. And so, I'm sure that's the same one.
Mm-hmm.
But, we passed one by though.
Did we?
Yeah.
What did I pass by?
Yeah. We have, from John Reynolds.
Oh.
over on his page.
Oh my gosh, yes, that was something we
Yeah.
have to definitely call out.
His page is called Jar of Geek. It's a blog.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about various and sundry geek things, and he gave us a really, really nice shout out
Oh yes.
on our podcast, and I'll just go ahead and read this. On this podcast, Raul Wybera and Jim Arrowwood are doing a rewatch of one of my favorite TV shows of all time, Babylon 5. Episode by episode, they discuss the episode, all the actors, the story, how the plot fits into the overall story of the series. I've enjoyed listening to their analysis, especially when they get on a military expert friend.
Which we'll be seeing more of, guys.
Shout out to JP there. I understand they plan to move on to the movies and Crusade after. I've paused my rewatch of this series until the podcast episodes catch up. This one started as basically a takeover of another podcast, the Sci-Fi Cafe, I think it was, and we both know that's a sci-fi diner.
Sci-Fi Diner.
Yep. And then Raul and Jim started their own show. One of the funnier things is when they start going down various rabbit holes, then get back on track with, "This isn't the whatever podcast."
Yeah, I think that's kind of become sort of a trademark line inadvertently.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for
John.
that.
And let me go ahead and add, he in the on the Facebook page itself, he has the tagline, "How many times have you sat around with friends and just talked about random things? Like gone over all the trivia of a favorite TV show or movie, reviewed a new movie, or talked about current news events in either funny or serious way. But what do you do when you don't have many friends to hang around with like that?" And then he hooks into our podcast from there.
Yeah.
So,
along with that, he also talked a little bit about the Highlander rewatched, Synthaholics, and the West Wing Weekly.
in episode 215, and now for a word, we get what I believe is a first-time comment from Chris Cornfield. "I just discovered this podcast a few weeks ago, and I'm almost caught up. So glad I found it." Chris, so are we.
Yes, we are also glad.
That is one of the things that keeps surprising me, actually, as we've gone through this, now starting season 3, is it does keep picking up new listeners.
Well, you know what they say, just keep those cards and letters coming in, folks.
Yes.
Well, the next one looks like it's from episode 221, comes the Inquisitor.
Oh, creepy episode. One of my favorites.
Yes. Let's see. It says, in the podcast, this is from John Reynolds. In the podcast, you mentioned that the show seemed to come a little later than it should, and he's referring to the episode. This is because of a potential legal issue. Someone broke one of Joe's rules in the discussion forum and mentioned a story idea. This idea was very close to the planned Inquisitor episode, so Joe had to get that viewer to sign a thing that said Joe didn't steal his idea.
Okay. Now, I knew there was an issue, a similar issue with Passing Through Gethsemane, which was a season 3 episode.
Right.
I wasn't aware of that. Of course, the general outcome of this, they kind of followed different paths. There was a big wait and delay. But I wasn't aware that there was an issue in this particular one. And by the way, I will also note some of these issues, coming up, and I knew there was more than one in the old Usenet forum. There was a freeform discussion of Babylon 5, and then there was a moderated discussion of Babylon 5. And Joe would not go to the unmoderated because of the legal issues. And even in the open form, the open unmoderated form, it was generally considered no. Let's not even create the impression. Let's not talk about story ideas.
Mm.
So I kind of remember what he was talking about. I knew it with the one episode. I wasn't aware of this one. And John
Oh,
also writes, Joe writes a lot more on this episode in the script book, especially about a cult he was part of at one point and his particular thoughts on Jack the Ripper lore.
hmm.
All right, I don't have the script book.
Mm-mm. Yeah, I
Oh,
don't either on this one.
John, I am definitely going to invite you. Please give us more detail, and if you want, do it by a voicemail. We will definitely make sure that gets out because now you've got me intrigued, and I would love to hear a little more about this one.
Nah.
Sebastian Kazmierzak, if I pronounced that correctly. If I didn't, please correct me. Writes one of the best ever, my favorite after Severed Dreams. Yeah, you know what makes this episode work is just its simplicity. Not a lot of fancy sets, not a lot of effects, and I know we talked about this on the show. It was just a big empty space with some creepy lighting
Yeah.
and some brilliant acting.
Yeah, the acting is what got me, especially the Inquisitor. Oh my
Hmm.
goodness. He
Yeah.
was spooky.
Well, his background is primarily stage, as we noted.
Mm.
Um, and it's not it's nice to see him without makeup because we will
Yeah.
see him again.
Yep. In not too distant future, as a matter of fact.
Right. And lastly, on this episode, Nathan Berg tells us great insights into the show, guys. Keep them coming. Well, we are absolutely going to do that. We've made our start into season 3 already, but we wanted to get some feedback to everyone first.
Yep.
All right, and Jim, do we have anything from iTunes?
Yeah. Yeah, we just have one.
Okay, well,
We
let's
have
hear it.
a 5-star review from
Wow.
The Doctor 1975. Okay. A very entertaining podcast that should be required listening for every Babylon 5 fan. A very in-depth discussion of episodes and interesting background for the episodes. And what a nice one. That's great.
Awesome. That is fantastic. Thank you, Dr. 1975. If I remember correct, that would still be Tom Baker. Oh, do we get the Dave Tennant versus Tom Baker argument going?
Oh no. No. I'm not qualified.
No. You're supposed to say it'd be nice, but we're not a Doctor Who podcast.
Oh. Sorry, things aren't.
We haven't gotten that
brain
line in yet. Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Well, I think that covers pretty much the feedback we've gotten since.
Yeah.
So, any additional thoughts? Like I said, I was kind of surprised that I'm not a huge Facebooker. Okay, folks, I'll be the first to admit it. I'm not a huge Facebooker. Heck, I still participate in some, and I'm going to date myself with the internet. If you know what a listserv is. It's basically a bulletin board that is managed via email. So it's like a big group mailing list where people comment back and forth.
Yeah.
Very big in the early 1990s and the late 1980s. So I am surprised that we got so much from Facebook, actually.
Yeah.
Oh, and hey, Jim, before we
Yeah.
go, we do need to give one more shout out, and that is to our friend Troy Heinrichs. Just a couple weeks ago, he had given a shout out to us on the Hollywood Outsider.
Yes, that's right.
He apparently there's some new viewers or some people curious about Babylon 5, watching the show. And he gave us a wonderful reference. So, Troy, thank you very much for that. Always appreciated.
Absolutely.
And I'll go ahead and add, if you happen to be a fan of the show Blacklist, Blacklist Exposed is the only podcast you need to listen to. Troy is awesome on it, and Aaron. They're both great. So keep the feedback coming. I don't care if it's on Facebook. I don't care if it's on the blog. I don't care if it's on the email that the wonderful lady at the end of our show will give you. We will follow up on all of them. Use as much of it on the air as we can, and with life a little more settled, hopefully we won't wait so long before our next. I like to do more than one a season.
Yeah. Okay.
So, any final thoughts or comments on your end, my friend?
Nope. Just keep those cards and letters coming in, folks, and some more of those nice iTunes reviews would be really nice.
iTunes reviews, absolutely. The more reviews we get, and especially since the name of our show is more of the Babylon Project podcast, it doesn't necessarily kick up automatically if you do a Babylon 5 search.
Yeah.
So that really helps us percolate and get more people listening. And this is just a fun show for us. So it's really, it's just a labor of love on our part, but we do both want to get as many people, make it available to as many people as possible. So definitely iTunes reviews.
So did we didn't have any boom today?
Nope. No boom today. None at all.
But we'll have boom tomorrow.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely boom tomorrow. There's always a boom tomorrow.
Yep.
Good night, folks.
Well, there it is.
Podcast terminated. Thank you for listening to the Babylon Project podcast. You can email Raul and Jim at the Babylon Project podcast at gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook at the Babylon Project Podcast. On the internet, we are at babylonprojectpodcast.wordpress.com. To subscribe to the podcast, you can find us on iTunes, or you can subscribe to the RSS feed on the webpage.